You know that feeling when you finally come home after college and everything feels safe and familiar? That was me, Alana. 22 years old, walking back into my childhood home in Cleveland after 4 years away. My big brother Marcus was still living there, working as an IT technician, and he seemed so excited to have me back. He had always been the helpful type, fixing everyone's electronics, making sure the house ran smoothly. Mom and Dad were thrilled to have both their kids under one roof again, and honestly, I felt so lucky to have such a close family. Marcus even offered to upgrade some of the old fixtures in my room to welcome me home properly. Before I dive into what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button if you have ever felt too trusting of family, and do not forget to subscribe, because this story will show you why sometimes the people closest to us hide the darkest secrets. Now let me tell you about the day my world completely shattered. Those first few weeks back home felt like a warm embrace from my past. Our two-story house in the suburbs had this cozy familiarity that I had missed desperately during my college years in Boston. The wide front porch where Dad Robert would sit with his morning coffee reading financial reports from his accounting firm. The kitchen where Mom Linda would prep her nursing scrubs while brewing tea before her shifts at Cleveland General. Everything felt exactly as I remembered, except now I was seeing it through adult eyes. Marcus had really stepped up while I was away. At 26, he had transformed from the slightly awkward teenager I remembered into this competent man who kept everything running. He worked remotely for a software company, which meant he was always around to handle household emergencies. When the dishwasher broke, Marcus fixed it. When Mom needed help setting up her new tablet for work schedules, Marcus was there. When the back porch light flickered, Marcus rewired it perfectly. I had just landed my first real job as a marketing assistant at a downtown firm, and the commute from our suburban neighborhood was about 30 minutes each way. Marcus was genuinely interested in my work, asking about my projects, my colleagues even offering to help optimize my laptop for better performance. He seemed proud of his little sister making it in the professional world. But looking back, there were small things that should have raised red flags. Marcus always seemed to know my schedule better than I did. When I mentioned grabbing drinks with coworkers after work, he would ask specific times and locations. If I said I was going for a run around the neighborhood, he would suggest the best routes and remind me about safety. At first, I thought he was just being protective. The bathroom on our second floor had always been the one we siblings shared growing up, but Marcus had recently upgraded it with these sleek LED light strips around the mirror and ceiling. The lighting was beautiful, creating this spa-like atmosphere that made getting ready in the morning feel luxurious. Marcus had spent an entire weekend installing everything perfectly, and Dad was impressed with how professional the work looked. Marcus also seemed unusually interested in the household routine. He would ask Mom what time she left for her shifts when Dad headed to the office, and particularly when I would be using the upstairs bathroom for my evening routine. Again, I chalked this up to his helpful nature. Maybe he was trying to coordinate his own schedule around ours, being considerate about shared spaces. His computer setup in the basement had become significantly more sophisticated since my college days. Multiple monitors, expensive cameras for what he claimed were work video conferences, and servers that hummed constantly. The whole area was always locked when he was not there, which seemed reasonable for someone handling sensitive corporate data. Marcus had become very security conscious, changing his passwords frequently and keeping his devices locked at all times. One evening in late September, I was getting ready for bed around 10:30 when I noticed something odd about the LED lighting in the bathroom. There was this faint blinking pattern that seemed inconsistent with normal operation. The lights would pulse briefly every few seconds, almost imperceptibly, but once I noticed it, I could not unsee it. I stood there in my pajamas, staring at the ceiling fixture, trying to figure out if this was normal behavior for LED systems. Maybe it was just the way Marcus had wired them, or maybe there was some kind of motion sensor feature I did not know about. But the blinking seemed random, not connected to any movement or timer pattern. Getting closer to examine the fixture, I used my phone flashlight to get a better look at the installation. That was when I saw it. Embedded within the LED housing was a tiny black circle that definitely did not belong there. My heart started racing as I realized what I was looking at. It was a camera lens perfectly positioned to capture the entire bathroom area. My hands started trembling as I grabbed a chair to get even closer. Using my phone camera with flash, I could clearly see the sophisticated miniature recording device integrated seamlessly into Marcus's lighting upgrade. This was not some accidental component or innocent mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, and had been recording me for weeks. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning as the reality hit me. Every shower, every private moment, every vulnerable second I had spent in this bathroom had been captured and stored somewhere. The brother I trusted, who I thought was being kind and helpful, had been violating my privacy in the most disgusting way possible. With my heart pounding, I forced myself to search my bedroom for additional devices. It did not take long to find them. A tiny camera disguised within what looked like a standard electrical outlet near my bed. Another one hidden inside a decorative box on my dresser that I had assumed was just moved around during cleaning. Marcus had turned my most private spaces into his personal surveillance system. I used my phone to document everything, taking clear photos of each device from multiple angles. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady, but I knew I needed evidence. This was not something I could just confront him about and expect him to remove the cameras and promise to never do it again. This was criminal behavior that required serious intervention. The realization of how long this had been going on made me feel violated in ways I could not even begin to process. How many hours of footage did he have? What was he doing with these recordings? Were there other victims? The questions spiraled through my mind as I sat on my bedroom floor staring at the evidence I had gathered, trying to decide what to do next. I decided to wait for Marcus in the garage when he came home from his evening routine at around 11:15. He had been out with friends, or at least that was what he told our parents, and I wanted to confront him privately before involving anyone else. Maybe there was some explanation that would make this horrific discovery make sense, though I could not imagine what that would be. When his car pulled into the driveway, I was sitting on Dad's workbench with my phone full of evidence photos. Marcus seemed surprised to see me there, but smiled and waved as he got out of his car. That casual friendliness made my skin crawl, knowing what I now knew about his secret activities. I held up my phone and showed him the clearest photo of the bathroom camera. His face went through a rapid series of changes. First confusion, then recognition, then panic, and finally a kind of defensive calculation. For several seconds he just stared at the image without saying anything. His first response was predictable denial. He claimed the devices were part of a home security system he was testing for his company. When I showed him the bedroom cameras, he said he was trying to determine if we had a break-in risk and wanted to monitor all entry points. These explanations were obviously ridiculous, and he knew I was not buying them. When I pressed him harder, showing him exactly where each camera was positioned and what they were designed to record, his story shifted. Now he claimed he was worried about my safety living in the house and wanted to make sure I was okay. This was somehow even more disturbing than the original lies, because he seemed to genuinely believe this justification made sense. Finally, when I threatened to show the evidence to our parents and call the police immediately, Marcus broke down and admitted what he had been doing. But instead of the shame and horror I expected, his confession came with excuses and minimization. He said he had not meant for it to go so far, that he just wanted to feel closer to me after years of me being away at college, that he would delete everything and remove all the cameras immediately. The way he spoke about violating my privacy made it clear this was not some moment of poor judgment or temporary lapse in reasoning. This was planned, methodical, and had been going on for months. He talked about the recordings like they were something sentimental, rather than evidence of serious criminal behavior. I told him he had until morning to confess everything to our parents and turn himself into the police, or I would do both of those things myself. Marcus became angry, then saying I was overreacting and threatening to destroy the family over something that had not actually hurt anyone. He said I was being selfish and dramatic, that families should handle private matters privately. That night I could not sleep at all. I kept thinking about every interaction we had since I moved back home, wondering what else he had been hiding, what other boundaries he had crossed. I also realized that involving our parents first was probably a mistake, but I wanted to give them a chance to do the right thing before taking this outside the family. The next morning, I gathered all three of them in the living room and showed them exactly what I had found. Dad went completely silent, staring at the photos with this expression of disbelief and disgust. Mom immediately went into denial mode, saying I must be misunderstanding something, that Marcus would never do anything inappropriate. Marcus put on this performance of remorse and shame, crying and apologizing and promising it would never happen again. He said he had been struggling with mental health issues and stress from work, that he knew what he had done was wrong, and he was ready to get help. Mom latched onto this explanation, talking about how we needed to support him through this difficult time. Dad asked me what I wanted to happen next, and I said Marcus needed to turn himself into the police and face appropriate consequences for what he had done. Both parents looked at me like I had suggested something extreme and vindictive. Mom said we could handle this as a family, get Marcus into counseling, make sure it never happened again, without involving outsiders who would not understand. I realized that morning that my family was more concerned about protecting Marcus from consequences than protecting me from further violation. They wanted me to keep quiet, let them handle it internally, and move on as if this criminal behavior was just a family disagreement that could be resolved with apologies and promises. That afternoon, I drove to the Cleveland Police Department downtown and asked to speak with someone about a sexual crimes case. Detective Sarah Martinez was assigned to my situation, and she took everything seriously from the moment I started explaining. She was professional, thorough, and made it clear that what Marcus had done was absolutely criminal behavior that needed to be prosecuted. Detective Martinez explained that voyeurism and invasion of privacy were serious felonies in Ohio, especially when they involved hidden recording devices in private spaces. She walked me through the process of filing charges and assured me that the department had experience with these types of technology-based crimes. The relief I felt talking to someone who understood the gravity of the situation was overwhelming. The next morning, police arrived at our house with a search warrant. Marcus was arrested in front of several neighbors, which was humiliating for our family, but necessary for my safety. The search of his computer equipment revealed hundreds of hours of recordings, not just of me, but of other women he had apparently been targeting around the neighborhood and at his workplace. My parents watched their son being led away in handcuffs, and instead of supporting me for bringing this criminal behavior to light, they looked at me with anger and disappointment. Mom told me I had destroyed our family, and Dad said he could not believe I would do this to my own brother. In that moment, I realized that I was about to lose more than just my sense of safety and privacy. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Marcus was charged with multiple counts of voyeurism, invasion of privacy, and possession of illegal recordings. Because they found evidence that he had been targeting multiple women over several years, the prosecutor decided to pursue the charges aggressively rather than offering any kind of plea deal that would minimize his consequences. I had to testify in court about finding the cameras and the impact of discovering that my brother had been violating my privacy for months. Sitting in that courtroom describing the most humiliating experience of my life while my parents sat in the gallery supporting Marcus rather than me was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Marcus's attorney tried to portray him as someone struggling with mental health issues who needed treatment rather than imprisonment. They brought in a psychologist who testified about stress disorders and suggested that Marcus's behavior was a cry for help rather than predatory criminal activity. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecutor made it clear that multiple victims deserved justice. Marcus was sentenced to 3 years in prison, mandatory psychological counseling, and registration as a sex offender. He would also have to pay restitution to all his victims for therapy costs and other damages. As the judge read the sentence, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice was being served, but I was also watching my family completely fall apart. My parents were furious with me for testifying against Marcus and refusing to ask for leniency in his sentencing. Mom said I was vindictive and cruel, that I had chosen to destroy my brother's future instead of helping him get the treatment he needed. Dad stopped speaking to me altogether, communicating only through Mom when absolutely necessary. The day after Marcus was sentenced, I came home to find the locks changed on our house. My belongings were packed in boxes on the front porch, and there was a note from Mom saying I was no longer welcome in their home. They had officially chosen Marcus over me despite everything he had done and everything I had endured. I ended up staying with my friend Jessica from work while I figured out my next steps. Jessica and her roommate were incredibly supportive, offering me their couch and emotional support while I processed being disowned by my own family. But I knew I could not stay there indefinitely, and I needed to find my own place and rebuild my life without any family support. The hardest part was not just losing my family, but dealing with extended relatives who had heard Mom's version of events and believed that I had been unnecessarily harsh with Marcus. My grandmother, aunts, uncles, and cousins all stopped returning my calls and text messages. At family gatherings I was not invited to, they probably discussed how sad it was that I had chosen to punish Marcus instead of forgiving him. 6 months after Marcus was sentenced, I received a package at my new apartment address. Inside was a pile of ash and partially burned fragments that I gradually realized were the remains of all my important documents. My birth certificate, passport, college diplomas, childhood photos, awards, and anything else that connected me to my family history had been deliberately destroyed. There was a handwritten note from Mom that said, "You are dead to us. You killed our son's future, so we are killing your past. Do not contact us again." I sat on my apartment floor, holding that note surrounded by the ashes of my entire documented history, and realized that my family had chosen to hurt me in the most permanent way they could imagine. Replacing all those documents took months of paperwork, fees, and bureaucratic hassles. Every form I filled out for a new birth certificate or passport replacement felt like another reminder that my own family had tried to erase my identity. But I was determined to rebuild everything they had destroyed and create a life that did not depend on their approval or support. Moving to Chicago felt like the right choice for a fresh start. I found a marketing position with a firm that appreciated my experience and work ethic, and I slowly started building a support system of friends and colleagues who valued me for who I was, rather than judging me for the choices I had made to protect myself and other women. Therapy became an essential part of my healing process. My counselor helped me understand that I had done exactly the right thing in reporting Marcus and following through with prosecution. She also helped me work through the complex grief of losing my entire family because they chose to protect a predator rather than support his victim. 5 years later, my life in Chicago had become everything I hoped it could be when I first moved there. At 27, I was a marketing manager at a successful agency, living in a beautiful apartment downtown, and in a healthy relationship with Jake, an elementary school teacher who understood my complicated family history without judgment. I had built a chosen family of friends who supported me through difficult times and celebrated my successes. My therapy had helped me process the trauma of both Marcus's violations and my family's rejection, and I had learned to trust people again while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Most days I felt grateful for the life I had created, rather than bitter about what I had lost. My relationship with Jake was the first romantic partnership I had attempted since the whole camera situation, and his patience with my trust issues had been incredible. He understood why I needed time to feel comfortable with physical intimacy, why I checked hotel rooms and bathrooms for hidden devices, why family conversations sometimes made me anxious. Jake never made me feel broken or damaged. On a Tuesday evening in March, I received a phone call from Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, who had maintained occasional contact with me, despite family pressure to cut ties completely. Patricia had always been the most reasonable person in our extended family, and her voice sounded heavy when she asked if we could talk privately. Patricia told me that Marcus had been released from prison after serving 2.5 years of his sentence, but he had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer, and his health was declining rapidly. He was undergoing chemotherapy, but the doctors were not optimistic about his long-term prognosis. The treatments were expensive, exhausting, and not covered entirely by insurance. Mom and Dad, now in their late 50s, were struggling both financially and emotionally with Marcus's situation. Dad had been laid off from his accounting firm during corporate restructuring, and Mom had reduced her nursing hours to help care for Marcus during his treatments. They were facing mounting medical bills and the emotional stress of watching their son deteriorate. Patricia explained that our parents wanted to reach out to me about reconciling the family before Marcus died. They were hoping I would consider coming home to help with caregiving and financial support during this difficult time. Patricia was clear that she was just delivering the message and not trying to influence my decision either way. The request felt surreal after 5 years of complete silence and rejection from my family. They had burned my documents, called me dead to them, and chosen Marcus over me when he was healthy and dangerous. Now that he was sick and dying and they needed help, they could not provide alone. Suddenly, they wanted their daughter back. I took 2 weeks to think about how I wanted to respond. Jake was supportive of whatever decision I made, but he helped me think through the emotional implications of re-engaging with family members who had hurt me so deeply. My therapist encouraged me to consider what kind of contact, if any, might be healthy for me, rather than what my family wanted or needed. Finally, I decided to drive back to Cleveland for one conversation. I wanted to see the situation for myself and communicate my boundaries directly, rather than through Patricia. I was not ready to pretend the past 5 years had not happened, but I was curious about whether my parents had gained any perspective on their choices during Marcus's imprisonment. The house looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered, with peeling paint and an overgrown yard that Dad would never have tolerated in the past. When Mom answered the door, she looked exhausted and older than her 55 years. Her first words were an apology, but it was the kind of apology that focused more on the current crisis than on understanding what she had done wrong years earlier. Dad appeared behind her, and we sat in the living room where I had first shown them evidence of Marcus's crimes. The irony was not lost on me. They explained Marcus's medical situation in detail, the financial strain they were facing, and their hope that we could put the past behind us and function as a family again during this difficult time. When they finished talking, I told them I did not hate any of them, but I also could not pretend that their choices had not permanently changed our relationship. I explained that protecting multiple women from a sexual predator had been more important than protecting Marcus from consequences, and I still believed I had done the right thing. I offered to contribute financially to Marcus's medical expenses, but I was clear that I would not be moving back home or taking on caregiving responsibilities. I was willing to have limited contact with them, but only if they could acknowledge that they had failed me as parents when I needed their support most. Mom cried and said she understood why I felt hurt, but she still maintained that families should stick together through everything. Dad remained mostly silent, but I could see he was uncomfortable with the conversation. They wanted reconciliation on their terms, with me accepting responsibility for the family division, rather than them acknowledging their role in choosing Marcus's comfort over my safety. Before leaving Cleveland, I visited Marcus in the hospital during one of his chemotherapy sessions. He looked frail and bald, a shadow of the confident man who had violated my privacy and targeted multiple women. He apologized for what he had done to me, and I believed the apology was genuine, but it felt too late to change anything meaningful between us. Marcus died 8 months later, and I attended his funeral, but maintained the boundaries I had established. My parents were grateful for my financial contributions to his care, but they never fully acknowledged the pain they had caused by choosing to protect him instead of supporting me. Some family relationships cannot be fully repaired even when people are willing to try. The most important thing I learned from that experience was that doing the right thing sometimes costs more than you expect to pay, but the alternative costs even more. If I had stayed silent about Marcus's crimes to preserve family harmony, other women would have been victimized, and I would have spent my life complicit in enabling a predator. True family consists of people who support you in doing what is right, not people who demand loyalty, regardless of the harm that loyalty might cause. Blood relationships do not automatically deserve protection when those relationships become toxic or dangerous. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your truth, even if they share your DNA. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have been able to turn in a family member for protecting other potential victims? Let me know in the comments below, and please hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and finding the courage to do what is right. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their safety and well-being matter more than keeping toxic family secrets. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you remember that you deserve to be protected and believed, especially by the people who claim to love you most.